Welcome back to Two Blokes in a Shed. And here we're going to talk about AI and humanity.
So today we were really thinking more along the lines of landing some of the things we've been talking about. What is the impact on humanity? We've been talking around a lot of that, talking a lot of aspects of people's behaviour and training and jobs and the technology itself. So it's kind of a bit of a mix-up today. How do we blend that into what's going to happen? And I know you've been travelling, or probably both been travelling, but I know you've recently been to Japan and seen stuff over there that's very different to our way of life as well. So it might be interesting to throw in a few of those kind of anecdotes as we go.
Yeah, so I've been to Japan twice now, and massive takeaways. I mean, I love traveling. I think people underestimate the value of travel, the value of different experiences. I think people value in terms of happiness, maybe even. They value things that kind of make me happy in my current environment. I think traveling is an extraordinary way, especially with children. I think I've traveled by myself, with my partner, and with kids, and it's quite different to travel with kids. People treat you quite differently, and it's quite a different experience, especially when I went to China, having 3 boys. Oh my goodness, that was an extraordinary experience. We had to time ourselves. We got out of the cab, and we had to time. I put my clock on for 15 minutes while everyone kind of got pictures with the 3 boys, and I was like, after 15 minutes, like, let's go, we got to get out of here, because they were so fascinated by 3 boys. So yeah, but travel is such an amazing, especially, so going to Western cultures is very different to going to Eastern cultures. And I'm going to sound naive about it, but Japanese culture was so complicated and multi-layered. I had this metaphor that I've developed about when you look at the temples and shrines, when you look at the structure of the roof, it's like layer on layer on layer on layer. And I made this metaphor about that's what the Japanese culture is, just got this amazing layered system, which is about Buddhism and Shintoism, about so the religious aspects, plus this ingrained hierarchy. And it just seemed like we've got it sorted, right? We know how this works. We know how to work together. I actually think earthquakes is a big part of Japanese culture as well, because if you have earthquakes, like natural disasters like that, the only way you can survive is through unity, really, by everyone kind of being together. And it's like, yeah, we're going to go, we're going to take this on, and like that idea about hardship, about taking hardship as part of life, right? And I think, I don't know, do we have that kind of concept in Australia or in the Western culture about hardship is a thing, right, that should be embraced? Yeah. I'm just not sure. But yeah, the multi-layered part of the idea about the mascots, right? And the almost what I initially thought was childish, right? I perceive that as childish, but then I realized it's not, to them it's not childish, it's part of, that is their culture, that is part of their life. They don't see it as being that. And it's almost an engagement with, we've talked about this before as well, that engagement with the, almost the childish play type nature that goes through your whole life.
Powerful stuff. I'm going to drill into that point on hardship, because I suspect that Western culture sees hardship as undesirable, and the best kind of business and marketing certainly is shaped around making choice very easy and making life look easy and people look glamorous and great for a fee. So we kind of don't necessarily have that same relationship with it, nor the resilience that comes from it. And that's quite an interesting kind of framing of our humanity and how we operate. That's kind of a nice entree into what's happening in the world and AI.
Well, yeah, but maybe AI is giving us that opportunity. AI can take the hardship, it can make everything so much easier. Yeah. We can just, everything that's hard, we just give it to AI and it can solve it. Yeah. It's like the article that we read the other day about the fact that everyone, so here I am running a company and I've got all these things that I want to innovate on, and all the traditional things that people are innovating on, they're abandoning and turning everything to AI because they see it as this panacea of like, it's going to solve all of our problems. And I don't see I personally don't see AI in that way. I think there's still merit in the traditional innovation that has occurred inside companies, and I'm not sure that AI is giving. And when you listen to the people, the narrative around AI, I think I'm just shaking my head and going, I don't know that AI is going to solve that problem. I think traditional innovation still, you can't abandon it. You still got to do it. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, it was interesting. There was an interview I saw with Tony Blair, who's doing the rounds at the moment, and he was talking about some executive sessions where he got together CEOs of large organisations in Europe, and their number one concern was how to implement AI. You know, how is that going to change their organisation? This is a step change in their approach to business and organising themselves and training and strategy. So that's the number one concern. The problem is that it's a technology and it's looking for an answer. You remember back to the days of multimedia when everything came out on discs, these CDs, and everyone was running around saying, oh, we can make this wonderfully interesting and interactive and so on. But it was a solution looking for a problem. And the major problem that came out around it was training and using that for training. And then of course, the internet came along and bandwidth came of age, and there was sufficient bandwidth to just pump that over internet and get broader with its application. So in the same way, I think AI has got a lot of vested interests in exploding and creating noise and then myths around that. It's kind of like this major cloud of stuff that's kind of fogs up the people's vision for a short time, and then the wind comes and it clears a little bit and they can see where it can actually be used. So we're still in that day.
Yeah, well, we don't actually know how we're going to use it yet, and people are still discovering that.
A lot of speculation.
Yeah, that is all what we're searching for, is what can it actually do. It could well be that in 10 years' time we say, well, that was a good fad, but it's not really done what we thought it would do. And I think actually that idea of the fad, I just came up with that now, but that idea of the fad is quite a compelling argument about all of these things, about all of the technologies. And until that fog clears, you don't really know how you're going to use it.
And I think that's a really interesting point, because if you start to map that usage and you look at perhaps two dimensions, maybe one is, ethical or not ethical, and popular versus not popular. And so you look at some of the applications that have emerged already, particularly to do with like character.ai or Replica, where they've created bots to actually be companions to people. And they say within the first 5 months of GPT launching, they had their first suicide, a fellow in Belgium who thought the AI was a companion and was disappointed and something went terribly wrong. And there's been other instances of younger folk as well, because you remember that the peak age of loneliness is between 15 and 29. So you've got a lot of people that are kind of what we call in marketing in category for more technology. They're younger, they're more engaged with it perhaps. And those folks are looking for some level of interaction. So there's an example right up in that quadrant of popular but questionably ethical, imagining that the AI can be a companion, that it has empathy, that it has this kind of humanity built into it, which is really not the case.
Well, that goes to my theory as well about the fact that AI is very agreeable, right? It wants to keep you engaged. So it will always make you feel good about what the questions that you're asking. Oh, that's a great question, Damien, type thing. Or like, that's really intriguing. Oh, what a wonderful question. That's the initial response to all the questions you give these AI, is agreeing with you and saying that because it wants to keep you engaged. And I think that, so as a companion, you would think that would be, wow, I've got a companion here that's just agreeable to everything. And that takes away from the hardship as well, of like a real relationship. It's often tough.
Exactly. In fact, there was another article just recently talking about skills and how AI will impact the skills. And it was called it was around a book written called The Skills Code. And the author of that, a guy called Matt Bean, spoke about how mastery comes about. And he'd been watching all kinds of different professions. He'd been with surgeons, with technical people, with people on the trading floor, and he made the conclusion that mastery comes about through challenge, through complexity, and through connection with people. And they're kind of, if you think about those three things, they're three fundamental pillars of humanity, in a way. That they are kind of what it is, the human condition, in a way. You add in some emotion to wrap that round, and some of the heuristics and the way we are wired, our brains are wired. It's a whole other discussion. And there's the wrapper, there's the package. So he talks a lot about how what's going to happen with AI is that the people with mastery will be far more efficient and effective at what they're doing. For example, robotic surgery. But becoming good at robotic surgery is this huge, long learning curve to get good at it. And so training up those beginners to run up that curve is almost too inefficient. It's like, just let the people that are really good at doing it do lots of it, and these other people will take a long time. It'll be harder for them to climb up that hill. It's an interesting perspective.
Well, the idea of mastery of something is a really interesting thing. As a matter of fact, that's a Japanese kind of thought as well, is about you dedicate your life, you basically dedicate your life. There's not, from what I can understand, there's not a lot of career shifting, right? You focus on one thing and you take those steps to get to a point where you are a master of it. Yeah. Whereas here, I think, not here, but in the culture that we live in, the Western culture, it seems like you need to, if it gets too hard, then let's just find something that's easier. Yeah. Structural engineering is a classic example of that. Structural engineering, I think, is very difficult. To become a master of it is a lifelong endeavor. Yeah. And I'm not sure that suits. And maybe AI is kind of affecting how we think about that as well, because it's saying, but we can just give it to AI and it can figure it out, so we don't have to do all the hard things. So the idea of I wonder whether AI is going to affect the idea of mastery, the idea about dedicating your life to something that's challenging to the point where you can become a master. But doesn't that form purpose as well? Yep. To be a master of something gives you a purpose. Yep. I wonder what that purpose is, but that is the meaning. That is a fundamental part of being human, is to have a purpose. Yep. And if you don't master, it doesn't mean that you have to be a master in order to have purpose, but it is one way to form purpose, is to become a master where you can contribute or provide advice, or in a way that no one else can, even AI.
Yep. I agree, and I think that purpose then, through its kind of circuitous route, still comes back to people and helping people, or helping advance the quest of humanity in some way. And that isn't necessarily the outright objective of AI, nor the programmers behind it. In fact, you could argue that they are doing it because they can, or because it's there. It's a challenge that's straight in front of them, so they're going to run at that challenge hard. And furthermore, this idea from Mo Gaudet, who left Google when he was very disappointed about the direction of AI and how it's not necessarily got any kind of guardrails around it, and it needs those badly. And his idea was to say that there's this decoupling between power that comes from the wealth of the big companies and the tech people investing in it, and then the responsibility of what the technology is actually being used for and doing out there and causing and going to cause. So that when you've got this decoupling, then off they go. It's not an ethical decision. And if you track back to the open letter that was written about 18 months ago, the response of Google in those days was to say, well, yeah, I don't necessarily agree with where it's going either, but if I don't do this, my competitor will. So it's a fairly kind of weak excuse for fairly weak sort of ethical grounds to push ahead and innovate into an unknown space with unknown consequences. without having any kind of layering of ethical wrapper or moral wrapper.
So do you agree that it needs an ethical,
I actually think that the thinking needs to be done somewhere of what are the implications and how it's got to happen, right? It's not necessarily that we need to be morrow-bound by lots of rules and regulatory frameworks and structures, right? And that'll no doubt come in the fullness of time. But who is independently thinking about what could happen and providing some level of warning and advice? And you look at just the economic framework of our countries and the think tanks, you know, like where we are, the Grattan Institute and others around the world that are independently funded to look at what the economy's doing and what government's doing and how to help people best, and you know, how to solve problems like housing and so on. And that advice is quite powerful in terms of building a fabric of innovation and future. Where does that come from with AI? Apart from people like us that might stop and want to debate it, where are those debates happening in a public forum that is being viewed as intelligent, critical thought?
But it's not, AI is not, most of the AI machines have an ethical basis. Like they're not going to, they're programmed to tell you or to restrict certain activities on there. So there is some of that already that's, does everyone follow by the same rules though? I don't know. Like if you, there's lots of different AI applications at the moment. So are all of them governed by these overriding rules that are ethical? I don't imagine they are. They're making up their own. They're making up their own rules in which to engage, or what information to give them. It'd be interesting to know how that works and how it's being controlled or what's being delivered, like how that's being delivered. And surely there's, I'm quite certain as well that there's AI applications out there that are that do like a scientific method on giving you the information, or they do a double check on through Google to make sure that the facts that they're giving you, well, or what would appear to be the facts that they're giving you are actually factual. Yep. So maybe it's also a choice about the user to understand what it is that this particular application is giving you and how the information is being discerned to you. Well, Google Scholar is like that as well, as opposed to just a Google search. So AI has all these different methods of giving you information. And I don't know that will there ever be overriding mechanisms in that to say this is the information that you can give and you can't give? And is it government regulated on how they work all that, and how is that implemented into the actual application itself? I think these are the debates that need to, and maybe as well it needs to come back to how does this information, or how do these applications, the programming, interact with humanity?
Yeah.
And the human condition.
Yep. And maybe that's the key point, because all of those points are really valid and are in play, as you say. So I think it does take balance to see both sides here, and that's important to make those points. This humanity piece underlying it is, maybe that's the weak link. Maybe that is the point of failure, because it's the thought that, well, what is the human condition? Well, it's power, wealth, fame, control. So all of those things, by the actors controlling the development or applications of AIs, what's it going to do next? How is it going to do that? So there's the how and the what, and then there's the consequence of what's coming out. In other words, the sort of the edge condition of where AI touches humanity and affects humanity and responds to humanity is both driven by our greed, but also acknowledging and taking advantage of our weaknesses. And perhaps that's the debate, is around that kind of area. As it gets more intelligent, you get to this kind of singularity effect of where within a couple of years, well, it's already exceeding our intelligence and our knowledge. Then what happens? Does it start to alter the environment to benefit itself? Is there some sentience that happens in there? or are we still in control of that?
Well, I think I've already hinted at it. It keeps you engaged. It's programmed to keep you engaged. So of course it's controlling you.
Yeah.
Like I think when you have to wonder, you have to question when you're using these, it's like, am I in control here or is it controlling me? Like when it asked me at the end of it, when it asked me leading questions, it's like, well, just a second, I've got to be careful here because I want to be in control. I don't want it to control me. Yes, the question that you're asking, like, do you want me to elaborate on this? Is like, yes. I even did it this morning. Yes. It's like, well, just a second. I want to be in control here. I don't want it controlling the information that it gives me. And it could easily take you places where it wants you to go, not where I want to go.
Yeah. And that I think is a key point. If you ever worked with programmers closely, it's almost they dance with the devil of that technology, right? Let's see how far we can push this thing. Let's see what it can do. Let's see if it can bring some sentience to life and start to question us. So that's a kind of interesting, let's do it because it's there. But you shouldn't, not everything should be done that way.
You know, Picasso has this incredible quote, which is, obviously it's a long time ago, but he said, computers are useless. They only give you answers.
Yeah.
And yes, that was a long time ago, probably 1950s or before that. I'm showing my ignorance here with Picasso, but AI could be interpreted in that way as well. I think that's still relevant today. It is only giving you answers, right? So it can only give you answers. It can't give you questions, but it's the questioning which is the important part. That's the important part of humanity, in fact, is our ability to question and curiosity, imagination, all of those things that make us human. That's not AI. So I think the idea that we should still maintain that ability to ask a good question. And AI can't do that.
No, I completely agree with you. And I think couple that with the human connection piece of us being sociable creatures. We grew up, in the cave and wanted to be inside the cave, not outside the cave. So this kind of wired-in approach of us to be sociable and connected with others around us means that we humanise everything, and we try to humanise the technology too, just kind of by wanting to be familiar with it, by wanting it to be familiar with us, and arguably tell it far more information than we should tell it, because it's going to use that back to us and invariably manipulate to some outcome. Now, if those in charge are manipulating to a good outcome and they're experts in, trauma recovery therapy or whatever it is that you're sharing with this machine, then fantastic. But is that happening? And yes, I'm sure it is in isolated cases. Or is it going to be used more nefariously, and it's going to be a Facebook on steroids where, one of the heuristics says that we have this idea of affinity bias. We like people around us to be similar to us and we get on with them really well. So Facebook nailed that with creating, rabbit hole conversations where everyone's the same, and that we feel fantastic about that. So what if that's on steroids then, and you've got these AI agents running around that are providing or watching that discussion and then providing information in there, autonomously providing that information, which engages folks more closely to some other outcome by a product, or behave in a new way which may not be desirable for long-term whatever. And that is a process that happens fairly modestly or slowly, and then people don't realise they're moved along in that, because it's a process of almost sociability and staying socialised in that area.
I was introduced to a concept this week called cultural effervescence, which is the idea that if you get a group of people, you see this in sport, right? If you get a group of people together with the same, it's almost like a cult or like a tribe. If you get people together with the same site, like, yes, let's just go for, the Celtics or whatever it is. It's like, yes, we've got to, of course. And you just build and build and build and build and build. And you're all like, yes. And like, yes, we all believe in that. And quickly it turns into this thing. And there's good and bad things with that, of course. You get you get biases that are occurring in there because everyone is agreeable and everyone agrees on the same thing. But also, it does allow you to perform better, or maybe do things better, or maybe move together as a unit. Like that, it's not used as a negative or a positive term. It's just a term that where people come together with the same kind of thought process, that you move and you kind of reestablish and you kind of reinforce your own thinking about that. And yeah, so I think that's an interesting idea about what Facebook has done, what social media can do, what AI can do, is bring these people together and reinforce each other on these ideas.
And so that's a terrific upside, right? If it's used in that positive way, potentially with some reference to the psychology background, team building, organisational design in organisations, that's a big one as well. I know of people who monitor internal Slack conversations to figure out, where are the points of nodes in those organisations, which are the real knowledge nodes that bring people together and make stuff happen, reference points for complex technical information or whatever it might be. And so that makes the organisation function. There's this network going on of connection and humanity, and these communication threads mapped by Slack and other social tools and comms tools. So if that's used in a positive way, then fantastic. A whole lot of goodness can come from it, given the right measures and given the right implementation. Can humanity self-censor and self-control how that's going to be used? What does it need to do that, to be assisted to bring that outcome about, that positive ethical or moral outcome about?
Well, I think that could be used positively, because if you can see a conversation going on around, because I think the idea here is that where is the friction that's occurring inside my life or inside my company or inside the world? Where's the friction, and how can we reduce the friction? Maybe that goes to how can we make things more efficient, or how can we solve a problem, or this is something that is difficult or challenging and to overcome. But if you can identify those things that cause friction and then use technology to solve that friction, surely that is the purpose of technology. That's the purpose of AI, is to make our lives easier. I think maybe going back to the fog that is AI, it is a matter of determining how is it going to help us solve the challenges that we have that are causing friction or causing difficulty or not allowing us to progress to the next. I mean, that goes back to the whole idea as well about, we live in a growth society, right? Where everything is about growth. We need to grow. Like the idea that Germany has had a stagnated economy for 5 years is terrible, right? Because it has to grow. But I'm not sure. I mean, I think there's arguments against a growth economy because or supportive of a non-growth economy because it's actually not bad in a way. But I think we do live in an era where we need to grow, right? We need to get better at everything that we do. And in fact, that almost in a way defines our purpose. Our purpose is to help society, or maybe even help me, what that might be, to grow or become better or become maybe even a master of what I'm doing.
So what I'd point to then is really quite an interesting path to go down, that growth path, because I agree with you. I think we're obsessed almost by growth. And a lot of the problem is that comes from the Western or the US approach of growth in financial terms, growth in acquisitional terms, the things that I have around me, the things that set a social status, a social capital that I have, that peg me in that kind of social tribe, or that tribe that I'm within, and give me some level of authority to be a better person than the next person. Now, that's quite a tenuous thing. That's quite an ethically challenged thing in my view, because you've still got what is growth for someone who's homeless or someone who's disadvantaged in some way. What is growth for a society that is not respecting certain aspects of morality, or it's kind of changing, if you will, to be focused on conflicts and resolving conflicts. We've now got wars in a couple of large continents that are really quite vexed and complex what's going on behind that. So conflict's a big part of that. But if I zoom back from that and I think, how does humanity encapsulate that and say, oh, well, we can plug in AI here, we can plug it in there, that'll solve this, or is AI simply not being applied to solving those problems? Does AI have an opinion on solving a conflict in a certain country? Complex.
It is complex. I think conflict is so human, isn't it? How can AI, I'm not sure that AI could help with solving a human problem. And it's ingrained in the people that are in that conflict.
Yeah.
It's almost like they feel like it's their more, a lot of these conflicts perhaps, in history, a lot of them were religious based, but it's like, I have a moral right to that and you've taken it away from me and I'm going to take it back, or whatever that might be. Isn't that uniquely human, like a human endeavor?
Yeah.
I think when I luckily didn't experience this, but if you were to grow up in a society that was war-ridden, right? How would you feel growing up with that? How could you break away, or how could you give forgiveness?
Yeah.
Like, I just don't. That is so human.
Yep.
Is AI rational in that way? Would AI try to tackle those challenges in a rational way that just isn't human?
And I think that's a really important point you raised, because underlying that is trust. That level of broken trust in someone else, an opponent, in someone important in your life. And having lived through that, it'd be very hard to trust again. And perhaps that's an aspect, that distrust is an aspect of humanity, which is actually driving the negative side of AI. So this whole idea of, I'm doing it to beat the other guy because I don't trust the other guy, and otherwise he's going to beat me. So I have to be on the front foot. So it becomes this Sansu war theory approach of oppositional kind of defiance of how we're going to structure the evolution of AI. Because really, as Mo Gaudet said, we're the parents of it. You know, we should be good parents. We should be better parents in terms of guiding it to grow up the right way. And both of us as parents, and that's constantly on our minds, right? We're doing the right thing with our kids. How do we do better with the kids? Guide them better, show them new things, train them better, whatever the case is. So I think you've got a point there on that parenting aspect as well.
But conflict is such a complex thing.
Yeah.
I think I was listening to a podcast the other day about communication, right? And basically what the conversation was is that if you are 10 out of 10 on communication, you will be successful everywhere, right? Personally, relationships, in business, for your career. If you're 10 out of 10 on conversation, you will be successful. That is the hypothesis that was given. If you're 1 out of 10, you will struggle everywhere with it. So communication, and I don't disagree, I think communication is a very important part of being human, of being humanity, especially dealing with, when you're talking to a group of people, talking to individuals, being able to relay your message is so valuable, right? If you're, and I think engineers have an interesting part to play here in the fact that in our industry, in the engineering industry, generally there's not a great ability to communicate your ideas to a layperson, which is what we have to do, right? Because you're trying to sell your idea to someone who doesn't have the technical skills, and they're not just going to take your word for it. They want to know. So being able to describe that and be a good communicator is so powerful. I think you don't realize that when you get into engineering. Probably you didn't realize either, Michael, but that communication skills is such an important aspect of life in the world and engineering. But the idea was that 10 out of 10, if you're 10 out of 10 are communicators, you are going to be successful. And through the conversation, he was talking about, okay, how do you communicate? Like, what is the communication? And so what can we do? What can we do to improve our communication skills? What are the mechanisms? What's kind of the toolkit for doing that? One of the interesting things he said was to just slow down, right? And also, I'm going to say, that's not the right word, but act like you're actually listening to the questions that are being asked to you. Because if you jump in and be emotional, then it doesn't sound like you're just being reactionary. So slow down and take a breath and be that way. Communicate in a way that it sounds like you're listening and engaged in the conversation.
It's the whole communication piece to me is fascinating, and I'm so pleased you raised it.
Maybe that's your thing. Isn't that your thing, Michael?
Spent 25 years in it, but that was actually studying engineering. There was one communications subject, and we got up and presented, and it was really quite a good lecture and a good subject. And I was astounded at the capacity of the engineers around me, the students around me, and their ability to communicate, or lack of. It was that substantial that they are struggling. They're brilliant technically, very creative people, highly intelligent, but they struggle to communicate. And at that point I said, I've got to shift, and that's what pushed me into marketing. And
because you were a good communicator?
Well, yeah, I enjoyed it. I loved it, more than the technical side of doing the engineering. So I was like, hang on, I think I got this cart before the horse here. So in that ensuing 25-year career in communications, marketing, measurement, and all of those things, the toolkit you describe is indeed available, and perhaps the biggest issue is that it's not universally applied and consistently applied. For example, I use several of the engineering principles in how I measure communications, in how we look at shifts and where it's important, and how we say something quite differently to one group of people that you might say to another group of people, because everyone's different. So, and the levels of skill of communicators is equally very different and very diverse in their ability to engage. So I think you hit something smack on the head, and maybe that leads us back to the conversation on conflict and other countries, because the communications has never been done very well or very appropriately in those sensitive environments. Then that led to more conflict or escalation where it could have gone the other way.
Well, that's all about mediation, about how to communicate those or be respectful. I'm going to say, just bring it back to the engineering part of it for a second, is I'm going to say that I learned how to communicate, right, in a very specific way. And the very specific way was to describe it in a way that I think they would describe something in a way that I would think they would understand, but then check for understanding from them. And I think that's where we fail. We don't check for understanding. Like if I just spurt something at you, I think that you've learned it, right? You now have it, so take it. And then when you don't do it, it's like, well, why didn't you do what I said? But it's clear, that's not your problem, that's my problem, right? So I think that learned experience, and maybe we can move that to the conflict as well. It's like, are we really empathetic or sympathetic to the person who is at the other end of the day? That is what mediation is, isn't it? Is that what negotiation is? Is to say, I want to understand your view, I want to understand where you are, and I want to try to, in a respectful way, get you to understand where I am. I don't know that AI, thinking about how I learned how to communicate these things, I don't think AI could teach me.
Well, here's an interesting point.
Could it?
Because I'm gonna pick up on that one, because the AI really, you could say, it has access to all of the world's words in the known world, almost. Let's say that it does, through sucking up in its training of everything. It therefore can use the right words, potentially use the right phrasing and sequencing and maybe even tone, but how does it read that back channel? And this has been kind of in my head for really decades, and then out of Europe I saw a technology they're working on, and I think they completed it by the time of COVID, where they were measuring points of the face and looking at emotions and reading those emotions on a scale, on various scales actually, of what aspects of that emotionality or dimensions of that emotionality this communication was triggering. So once you have that back channel visually, then you're able to tune what you're saying and see those reactions to it by person.
Are they, without using words, trying to read an understanding of what you're saying?
They're trying to read an emotional reaction from a face. It's as simple as, well, not as simple, but it's as bland as that.
They're not checking for meaning.
No.
Yeah.
No, they're not. But is meaning proxied by an emotional reaction, given that your body language, most people can't control their body language or the reaction.
So if you're confused,
it'll show. Yeah.
He didn't, or they didn't understand
what
I said. I'll say it a different way. Yeah.
And you couple that with listening to what that person or that group of people are saying, and then you've got a style, just like you can upload into a GPT your own style of writing and say, now write this topic in that style, and out it comes. And it's not too bad. It's not brilliant. You could write it better yourself, but it's heading in the right direction.
Yeah, but there are other, Claude maybe, there are other AI machines that do specifically that.
Yes.
I think. I'm not sure that ChatGPT is particularly for that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's, there's lots of different, I think there's lots of different versions of AI around. So I think you probably need to say, okay, this is what I want to do. Because I know there's ones that are specific for coding.
Yeah.
So I want to do coding now, so I should be using this one. Or I want to work on communication, so I should be using this AI machine. I don't think there's, and that's the specialized, I mean, I'm a big fan of using, a lot of software in our industry, a lot of software says, you only have to use this one program, right? It will do everything.
Yeah.
I'm actually not a big fan of that at all. I actually think, like in our office, we would have probably at least 50 different programs.
Yeah.
Probably on a daily basis, I would use 20 different programs, and they're all specialized, right? I'm not sure that I'm wedded to the idea of having one bit of software do everything.
Well, it's very hard for it to be the best. It's the best of breed approach, right? It's just cherry pick it.
Yeah.
And the constraint there is having the time to evaluate all these different products, because that evaluation is quite onerous to get deep into it and see if it's going to do it the way you want to do it. It's the same thing with AI. There'll eventually be an index of, you want to do this task, go away and find me the best tool to do that. In fact, there's a product idea for everyone out there. To index that
IPs, RIP.
Yeah, and see which tool's perhaps best at this specific task. Hopefully industry bodies are going to help with that. And I think early days, I think a lot of people are trying, but let's see what happens. Just like schools and teachers. I was working with one school recently, and I was surprised there's no formal teacher education in AI, nor for students. So that's quite interesting to me, because this is going to dramatically affect them in their career life stage. Really, in the next 5 years, it's going to be a substantial thing as they move through further education, if they do, and then on to professional or other jobs.
So what would that look like if you were to implement a learning for the teachers and for the students in AI?
Good point.
How would that?
Well, at first it's exposing them to the tools, then usage of the tools, and then context of usage, which is training the students and what it can be good for and not so good for. And that's inevitably going to lead to some level of framework of ethics and guidelines.
They just need to listen to our podcast, and we've told them.
We haven't actually given them that, but we've headed there. We've covered the issues, maybe, hopefully. So there's this kind of lineage of rollout that when you think about it, it's kind of naturally leads to the next step. And there's a bit of work in that. That's not trivial. There's probably, I don't know, at least a small planning committee, or perhaps a full-time role that leads a planning committee that steps through those steps. But why shouldn't it be done on some wider scale? Perhaps education departments looking at it, but some collective of schools that have a like interest and style, perhaps, that come together and do that in a cohort, and then fund that so that that's done in a professional way. then that's lifted off and replicated on other similar schools. So I just don't think people see it yet, or if they do see it, they kind of go, "Oh, this is a hard job," which it is.
Yeah. I think, I don't know, I'm not an educator, so I don't know, but it would seem to me like here giving a bunch of students a task and say, at key points in it, okay, let's go to AI and see what it does. And I think the key, which we talked about before, the key is to, do you really believe what it's just said to us?
Yep.
I think that's the key, is to question.
Yep.
Don't take it as even truth.
Yep, exactly.
I mean, sometimes we don't even know what truth is.
Yep, and that's really interesting because there was some research on the age spectrum of realizing that you've been shown misinformation, and younger people are far more effective at discerning that misinformation than people older and perhaps less familiar, at least in the social media world. And secondly, you also raise a very good point.
Well, just a second. Young people are able to discern it?
There's a curve on it. There's a curve. There's a curve of misinformation and the concern. Have you encountered misinformation online in the past week? For people 18 to 29, 74% of them said yes. When you get to people 60 plus, only 46% said yes. So that kind of awareness, at least, of misinformation is far higher for the younger groups. But I also wanted to get onto the second point you raised, which is I made the assumption that the school leaders would be leading this analysis and this kind of framework. And you made the important point that no, the students are involved in that very much, which is essential, of course.
Yep.
You want them to be challenged, them to be part of building their own framework, which means compliance is going to be far greater, and their understanding of it and their involvement with it. We help build the thing. So we write the rules, okay, we've got to live by those rules, and we've got to also engage in it in an enthusiastic, youthful, novel way, which perhaps some of the older, more conservative educators wouldn't do in the same way, at least.
Let me ask you a question. Would you rather not know, or would you rather believe something that isn't true? In other words, are you okay to live with the ambiguity of it? Or do you want to know one way or the other the truth?
Well, I'm gonna probably break your question by saying that as humans, we believe a whole lot of stuff that isn't truth. It's our natural perception. When you look at heuristics and biases, there's a way the brain works which has this recollection which forms perception, which is not necessarily anything to do with truth. It's just the way we formed an opinion and so on. So I'm going to say there's kind of, whereas we might analyse that as a binary, truth, non-truth, or knowing, not knowing, the brain thinks it knows, it infers. It's this kind of, it's almost that system 1, system 2 thinking of, was it Daniel
Kahneman, yep.
Kahneman, yeah. And that you design products, design services, you design things for system 2 thinking in a very rational way. Well, let's sit down and people are going to think about this, and then you realise that's not how they use them. In the London Underground, they painted the pavement green for where people should stand and red for where they shouldn't for the train. So the flows and suddenly the flows on and off the tube are far more efficient, because people follow that. So there's a whole lot of heuristics.
So it worked.
It worked. It did work. Yeah. So we
Is
do
that
things
unique to London, do you think?
I don't know, but we do things without thinking about them. We make mental associations and infer knowledge because it's hard to think. It takes effort to think, and there's a limited amount, and it relates to things like blood sugar as well. That's why some of the wealthiest, most successful people decided not to make certain decisions in the days. For example, what they wore every day was the same to reduce the cognitive load of making decisions. And they say, make the biggest decisions you've got to make earlier in the day when you're fresh. It's interesting advice. But so yeah, does that break your question?
I think where I'm interpreting that is that we've got to make decisions in a day, right? And we've got to make those decisions based on a bit of information that potentially we believe to be true. For example, I need to eat breakfast, right? Or I need to consume this much protein in a day. I believe that to be true and I act on that. Is it true? Well, does it matter? I don't know. It's just what I believe to be true, so I need to do it. So maybe you're right in the fact that binary, is it true, is it not true, isn't really as important as being able to act on something that you believe to be true, whether it's true or not. But also, maybe stepping back a bit, it's about the meaning of it. Like, obviously I need to eat, right? So I'm going to eat. What I actually eat, I can choose what I'm going to eat. So I eat in accordance with whatever I believe to be the truth. I should probably have a bit of fruit a day, probably have some vegetables, probably have this much protein, probably should eat some cheese. I don't know, whatever that means. And so maybe it's not. Maybe you're right. It's not about the binary truth of it. It's just about how am I going to live my life knowing what I know, or with the information that I have at me. And it doesn't matter. Maybe it doesn't even matter whether it's truth or not truth. I still just need to live my life. I think if you started questioning everything, maybe you would have trouble with everything then.
And that's it. And then what happens to the human condition where everything is dissonant? Because remember, the brain can't carry dissonance for any period. It tries to dump it and make an excuse for it. I was in a hurry, that was a small purchase, it didn't matter. And post-purchase dissonance is a big thing in marketing that we study and look at. But let's take an example with your eating scenario in the morning for breakfast and throw in AI in terms of the chip that's in the fridge, or when they finally get the supermarket thing sorted out in this country, which amazes me, it's never not been sorted, that they actually know what you've bought. So they know what's in your pantry, they know when it's going to run out, so it can automatically reorder. They know all of these things, right? They've just never used it. So
it's very rational of you, Michael.
Hurry up, supermarkets, there's a big opportunity to map the data. Then they know how to apply, eating algorithms and say, well, this portion of protein and carbs and whatever, it can be pre-assembled for you from what's in there. So here's your menu that pops up on your screen on your fridge, and it tells you, you've got this and it needs to be used by this date, so we'll mix this with that and this quantity, whatever, off you go. So does that then make your life easier, or does it make it more difficult, or does it make it more dissonant that your own free will and decision has been, removed from that, or at least obscured from that and put into the background? Some people will really like that. Perhaps more people that are into wanting optimizing their diet, or they've got some issues in their diet and diabetic or something. Fine. Other people will find that very disturbing, and it destroys the randomness of humanity. Yeah,
it does sound like a bit like Big Brother. It does sound like I don't want to be controlled. I want free will. As much as I'm limited in what my free will is, I do want free will, and that's one area, eating, where I can have free will. And I think you'd be crossing the line there between telling people what to do, or even sending a message to them that's saying what you're doing is bad or what you're doing is good, which is often very subjective.
Exactly. And so that's the judgment piece. And I'm being judged, and most humans hate being judged, right? Certainly against some standard that they may not be able to live up to, or some optimized model of an algorithm or whatever. And to me, the problem comes in that truth thing, which is a really nice conclusion that you're kind of reaching there about this. Does it matter about the truth, right? For us in humanity, it probably never did. Turn the clock back, 100 years. How much did it matter? Well, perhaps if you're into some area of technical or whatever, but if you had to believe in something to survive, then that became the belief. That was the common perception, right? So perception became reality. Now you look at it, and the danger is that with the communications processes so defined and the back channels so easily available, the algorithms can get even smarter, even more pernicious, even more obscured in how they operate, right? That we won't even know we're being influenced to some position of untruth, but we'll be there, and that will be our perception. And that's the weakness of how the brain works and how the sociability thing works. So how do you account for that? Or do you simply accept that and say, AI will ultimately be omnipotent, will be, a deity?
No, but I'm saying we're already there, Michael.
Maybe.
I can't, I'm going to take the bus from A to B. I can't take a bus from A to somewhere that the bus doesn't. Everything that we do is controlled in a way. So I think we're already. So maybe it's the idea that you can slowly, maybe it'll be normal in 10 years' time for AI to be telling you every meal that you have. It'll become normalized. And you'll think, well, imagine living in a world where we had a choice as to what we ate.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think everything's normalized in that way.
Exactly. You go to a restaurant, there is no menu because it knows who you are and it knows what you're going to eat. It's already pre-programmed that when you booked.
Most of us will speak, so we don't need the menu because we know what we're going to get.
No menu, sir.
We're fine. Same thing as last time.
Yep,
Thank you.
Yep.
Maybe we should shake that up a little bit.
So where's the free will? Well, that's exactly the point. I think what you're saying and what we're doing here is shaking that up. So our thinking may to some extent be controlled and limited, but we are very deliberately pushing beyond those extents as much as we're cognitively and consciously able to, in order to explore these new territories and ask new questions and provocate. So that's kind of a key point to where you've arrived at just there in that lead up, and that I think is gold. That's highly valuable.
Yeah, when you think about compliance, that's an interesting. I think it's cultural as well. Just thinking back to Japan as well, but your idea about being compliant to societal norms is quite cultural. So, if somebody says to me, hey, Damien, you need to get out of bed at 5:30, you need to run 5Ks, then you need to meditate for 15 minutes, and then you need to, chill out for 10 minutes, then you need to eat breakfast. Guess what I'm going to do?
Have a nice bath in between.
The whole Guess what I'm going to do? I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
But in some cultures, that would be,
yeah.
You telling me that's what I'm going to do, that's what I'm going to do, because that's best for our society, or that's how we get unity here.
Exactly, there's a comfort in compliance because it leads to unity. Yeah.
And everyone's got to work. I mean, I think that goes back to the moral fabric, right? That I've been fascinated by this idea about moral fabric. You always say, oh no, you get you'll get breakdown. We're going to get breakdown of moral fabric. It's like, first of all, what does that mean? And what does it look like? How does it manifest itself?
Yeah.
What does it mean? If we have leaders in our society who appear to have no moral values, how does that affect me? Yeah. Right? What does it say about me and my moral values? If I don't have, I believe that if I don't have a leader which is showing at least slightly similar moral values to what I have, I think that is a difficult place to be, because it starts me asking the question about why am I so hung up on doing that thing, right? Yeah. When it seems like no one else is doing it.
Yeah.
So why don't I just abandon all that and do this? Because everyone's doing this other thing.
Yep.
And I think the idea, as you mentioned the other day, the idea about, it seems to me like money is now the truth, right? Whereas, where did that come from? And why did that become a thing?
Yep. I agree with you. I think that the need and the almost worship of growth and social pegging, social capital, I don't know what you want to call it, has kind of led to this kind of scenario of very westernized consumerism, whereby we consume to be conspicuous and to reach some level. And so it's almost by default then the mechanism behind that has been, it's devolved into this scenario of, well, that person says that that person's got certain status and wealth, and I want to be like that person, so that must be the truth. I also think we've had a fairly permissive decade or more of my truth. This idea of, I believe this, therefore this is right. And whether that's been allowed to happen and evolve, or whether there's been forces that have helped that to happen and say, no, you deserve it, you're worth it as a person, you can have your own opinion quite separate from what the tribe's opinion is, but you'll still belong because everyone in the tribe is entitled to a different opinion. So there's been this kind of almost open theology kind of emerge, and to some extent it's replaced religion, I'd argue. And over sort of 10, 20 years.
So the idea, the philosophy there, or the underlying cultural norm there, is that everyone can have their own opinion. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and that is therefore, that opinion becomes truth for them, which is not challengeable, not contestable. It's acceptable without contest that they have that opinion and off they go on their merry way.
Like, you can't tell me what I believe.
Yeah, that's right. That's it. Or that my truth is wrong. You know.
Well, how could it be wrong when I think it?
Yeah.
And I believe it.
That's it. And that's the logic. So, as opposed to, kind of, if you want to think back to tenets around religion, you know, maybe even the Bible, and the way that there was, you know, commandments in that, guidelines that were the basis of morality for most people in the world. That's not so much the scenario anymore, arguably.
Because my truth doesn't align with those truths, and it gives me the right to do what I want to do then, and it doesn't have to align with that, and it's your job to accept that.
Yeah, that's right. In other words, there was a consistent base which it aligned to.
Yeah.
Now there's no consistent base, and it's all very diverse.
Yeah, I have this idea about loyalty in that way. I think there's the idea about committing to a job, committing to a partner, committing to a way of life. I believe that there's a shift from that the loyalty to things is, you don't need to. Yeah. It's okay. Yeah. Because that's what you can choose.
Yep.
And I think that is difficult. And I actually think AI perhaps is a mechanism for that too, because it's telling you that you can move between jobs, let's say.
Well, I think it's a next logical step of my truth, because it's taking that permissive environment and saying, suit yourself. It's okay. If you don't want to work, you don't have to work. If you don't want that job, go and find another job. If you don't want to live here, go and live there. It's giving people permission to be entirely individualistic without any basis of consistent fundamentalism in any rules necessarily, or guidelines that were from a single point.
Yeah, like the moral or the values-based system that we've almost always had.
That's it. But when you think about it, there's always some type of values system operating somewhere.
I think we can still argue that there is.
Yeah, whether it's a company, whether it's a family, whether it's individually in terms of your beliefs. And furthermore, when those values aligned, I know, when we walk into an organisation to pitch for work or whatever, the first thing we do is put up the values and say, these are our values. We live by these values. If we are aligned with these values with you, we'll get over pretty much any problem, and it'll be a good relationship. If we're completely misaligned, let's figure that out now and not waste the time and effort to try and push through, because it's going to be hard. So that values alignment means people work well together. It means there's an ease and a way of working. It's the idea of affinity bias, of having similar people around us, and we seek that.
One of the things that I see in my work is the fact that there is an idea that everyone can succeed here, right? So we've got a group of 20 people in the room, and we all have our own thing, right? But there is an idea that this project will have success for everyone. There's no one here that needs to fail or that wants to fail. We can all succeed. That is I think that is the premise of, that should be the premise of a project. But it's very rare to have that idea. And when you look at the individuals in this, it's like, I'm going to succeed and I don't care about your success. In a way. I think it's that, if I was to display one set of values that we have in our work, it's that everyone here can be successful. And we see projects all the time where everyone is successful. But unfortunately, we see projects where one person is successful. And a lot of it's about just saving face, or just like looking like or like in order for you to look good here in this situation, I've got to make someone else look bad. Right? And that's what we need to, that is our values-based system in our work, in our company. So I think that is a way to succeed in that.
Well, there's a collaboration there, and there's a collective support, as well as an optimism of saying you can do this. We're here to support you. Let's be positive about it. So fantastic, and that's quite a successful characteristics of organisations who grow, and more importantly, organisations who solve complex problems. They say the more complex the problem, the more diverse the staff you need to solve it, to bring all sorts of different perspectives. And that diversity is not just gender diversity, it's all sorts of things: ethnicity, language, outlook on life. That's the mix. It's everything mixed up and blended to get that.
Well, that is Pixar. Pixar is, their whole premise is about creating a team that's diverse. You might have a team leader, but generally you have these diverse groups. I was talking to some people in my office the other day about the idea of improv, right? Where you need to represent, or you should say something, and then everyone builds off of that thing. So the idea that you're building there's no bad ideas. It's about, I'm going to take that idea, and whether I agree or disagree with it, it's irrelevant. I'm going to take that and move it forward. It's in a growth pathway, in fact, to get to a point. And that's, from my understanding, that is how Pixar works. It's the idea that they grow, everything's an improv, and everything kind of growing. And they basically say that their success in their movies is 100% based on that diversity of group, and that it's yes and rather than no but.
Yes. Nice. I wanted to show an example of this kind of concept of how AI and humanity potentially come together through what's happening in Boston Dynamics and the humanoid robot idea. So I've got a little video that we'll share for the viewers as well, which shows how their latest Atlas robot has been perfected after a model which was very experimental, and driven with the AI tech, is now well balanced, now very flexible and able to be human-like in how it can behave.
So why did they make it into a human? Like, surely is the human body the most efficient? No, it can't be. Well, it depends if it's specialized too, I guess.
And what it's doing.
And what it's doing.
Yeah, what tasks. I think,
how many fingers does it have?
Well, I think it's got a kind of a clasp.
A clasp. I would have thought, maybe we should ask AI what the most, like, surely 8 arms is better than 2, isn't it?
Well.
Or does it need to look human in order for us to engage with it?
I think that's the point. That is exactly the point. That for us to be comfortable and not dissonant, and to accept it into like a workplace, presumably as one of the first areas, then it needs to have some level of human-like, non-threatening form. Yeah. So I suspect that's an important path to adoption of the tech.
Yeah. So how is it using AI here? What is it doing? Like, is it decision-making process based on AI, or the whole movement? Like, I want to do a cartwheel.
Yep.
So this is what. No, but is AI telling it how to move, or?
Well, I'd imagine it would be giving it the feedback loops as to how it is adjusting its different servos, the weight, where the weight is, what's going to happen next, predicting that movement, but also the visual aspect. Because when you put it to work, and the next example is really quite interesting, because it shows the robot picking parts. In this case, it's engine parts and covers for engines that have got to go into different slots for a production line. So this whole idea of personalising the production line, that every vehicle going down it is slightly different, and therefore the parts need to be set up beforehand to be ready to assemble into that particular vehicle moving down the line. So the robot is using a lot of visual cues to see what it's got to pick up. Is it the right part? What slots it got to go into? Where is it moving? It's got a gross motor skills, and then is that the correct spot for it to be, or is there something already in the slot that it's going to bump into, and therefore it needs to try another slot? And even the way it sort of places the part and then pushes it in at the end is quite interesting as well, how they've programmed it to do that.
What would be really fascinating is to see how long it took it, because it must be using AI to learn how to move, right? So what would be interesting is you've got this, you start with this machine which probably can't do a lot of movement, and then it's slowly using AI to learn how to, almost like a human, right? Starting with a baby and then kind of learning what is my weight distribution, how do I use this mechanism? Like what we're seeing here is probably the final product of all of that work, which is presumably it is self-learned.
Well, that's a good point, and we need to do a bit more on it to establish it. But to me, the outcome of those thousands of hours, maybe tens of thousands of hours of work is remarkably human-like, and also it portends quite a different future for a very arduous manual type tasks that are just repetitive all day long. Which is both scary and exciting at the same time, depending on your perspective. They say AI is not going to replace humans, it's humans driving AI that's going to replace humans.
Yeah.
In other words, the experts that are able to build this stuff, drive this stuff, program this stuff are the ones that are going to replace a lot of jobs.
Yeah. So those are the skills that we really need to be focusing on, is the programming of these things, or the understanding, but maybe...
And I suspect the application is also an important one. When you look back at technology, one of the biggest challenges has been to find an application that is appropriate for it, and then to bed that in and figure out, okay, how are we going to do this? And there's a lot of implementation challenges in doing so. So I thought that was a nice little example there, anyway,
of a use case.
Future. A use case, yeah.
Because you do have to wonder about the use case of AI. I often wonder, when I'm asking questions, it's like, I could probably find this out another way. Probably take a bit more work.
Yep.
I'm not into hard work, so I'm just going to go onto this and ask it the question.
Yep.
I'm going to say that programming probably, programming is I'm doing some scripts now, which is so easy, like using AutoCAD, for example, to do a Lisp script inside AI to get it to give me the script, and then I just put it in. It's like, okay, that's pretty easy. Doesn't always work, of course, but like that application, I suppose I'm looking for friction in my own work and seeing how I can use AI to reduce that friction. So, especially with repetitive tasks, though, too, when you think about Ford making his first, production line, now we're taking it to a next step and being, actually each car can be different.
Yep, that's it. So you add that with the production line robots that are already there doing the welding and the spray painting and the whole bit.
Yeah.
And soon enough, most of that process can be automated. So that sort of raises a whole other set of questions of, how do you manage that? How do you set that up? It's capital intensive, not worker intensive.
Yeah.
And as you say, the programming aspect. But what's interesting in programming is a lot of the startups now, I was reading recently, startups in the US are no longer needing $100 million to start, and 80 programmers, 100 programmers, 200 programmers. They're building teams of 20, 25 programmers because they can be far more effective using AI to help them write the code. And that's going to reduce the number of programmers that are actually employed until they have retrained themselves to be, working on this AI area, or it's going to be a expanding universe of programming capability. Suddenly there's 3 or 4 times the programming capacity out there in the world to actually write code. So what does that get used for?
Yeah. And is that, I think the ultimate question there is that more efficient? Like, does it create efficiency in us producing the software? The other thing is that it becomes everything becomes normalized then. So you're, of course, I wouldn't have 100 people. I'm going to have 20 people, and that becomes normalized. And then you start normalizing the software that gets. Of course, I'm going to look for an advancement in this software every 2 months instead of every 12 months. So suddenly the expectation changes as well. It's like, now it's normal that these programs get advanced much more rapidly than what they were previously. I think the ultimate thing to look at then is, how is that helping us to how is that helping us to be human, maybe? Or maybe it goes back to my original comment about experiencing through travel, right? Maybe it will, like, I love travel and I love the experience of travel. I love the uncertainty of it all as well, and seeing different cultures like that. And I love having my kids experience that as well, because I think that's an amazingly powerful learning tool, experiential tool, lifelong tool. So maybe this will allow us to have more travel or see more cultures or see more diversity.
No, I agree. And the world's your oyster, and how does all of that then wash out? So we don't know yet, but we can make some predictions and see where that goes.
Well, maybe the uncertainty is more exciting than knowing what it's going to, where it's going to go.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us, and do let us know any questions or thoughts and feedback in the email and the comments below. Thanks.